we were getting so transfixed on what democracy looks like and what all these like structures should look like. And, we kind of lost sight of the importance of having just hangouts. Most people are not going to just jump right into union stuff. Most people are busy or burned out, etc. So building that community first and foremost is the most important thing. All the other stuff will come, and it's not truly democratic if you have 3 or 4 people, helping out to build everything because no one else is coming around. So community is the number one thing to focus on.
Hi everyone, welcome to our union show made in collaboration with Martian Radio. My name is Razvan Stanescu. I am the president of the Graduate Workers Union at UMassL, called GEO, and I'll be your host tonight. In this episode, we're going to focus on how to start a union, and we have Tyler Daguerre here, a law school graduate, a Starbucks barista, and previously a founding and lead organizer of the Starbucks Workers Union, Massachusetts chapter. As well, a prominent part of the national campaign. Currently, he supports independent unionization efforts and has put together a pro bono legal initiative to support independent organizing with the National Lawyers Guild so that workers can organize without the burden of legal fees. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Hi, Razvan. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to Martian Radio as well. It is an honor to be here.
So to start off, tell us, how did you get started with your union work at Starbucks?
Yeah, so I previously had a background in organizing in undergrad and at my law school. In undergrad, I did environmental justice organizing, and I served on a restorative justice board in student housing. And that kind of led me into kind of broader community organizing. I was also a poli-sci major, which gave me an understanding of the system, but a clear desire and, curiosity to try to change it and figure it out. And so I went to law school thinking that was the path. And I started a mental health and wellness organization through that because a lot of law students and lawyers have disparately high rates of depression, anxiety, other mental health issues, substance use issues. So that was something I really wanted to, address. And so the sort of general theme became wherever I was in my community, I wanted to pinpoint the issues that people were experiencing and try to unravel them and change them. And so as a organizer, as a socialist, as someone who believes strongly in societal change and, the necessity of organizing workers, I was a barista to make ends meet while I was in law school, and I knew that that was an important place to organize. So I first started talking with our neighboring bookstore, the Brookline Booksmith, which is unionized through UAW. And I asked them about the unionization process. And right around that time, workers in Buffalo, New York had organized with Starbucks Workers United. And then coincidentally, a law school friend of mine who's from Buffalo connected me to an organizer up there. And then that's just kind of how we got started in Massachusetts.
That's amazing. So what exactly does the composition of your union look like, this Starbucks union, when you started?
Yeah, so the composition, I would say, at least in Massachusetts, so for context, the Starbucks Workers Campaign is run with Workers United, which is an affiliate union of the SEIU, which is a bigger union. So you got SEIU and then Workers United, and then Workers United was helping organize Starbucks workers. So I got connected to the Starbucks Workers United folks in Buffalo, but Workers United didn't have any chapter or union representation in Massachusetts. So myself and my colleague, Kyla Clay, who was coincidentally trying to organize her store right down the road in Alston, we simultaneously got connected and filed our stores at the same time. And at that point, it was really just the two of us and our coworkers who were trying to build this union and communicating with the Buffalo folks in the meantime.
That's amazing. Was there, by any chance, an inciting moment that prompted your groups to unionize? Was there any single topic that sort of galvanized the people to want to be doing this?
I think that COVID drew a lot of people to recognizing different workplace issues and disparities. It really hit a lot of us hard in the service industry. So I would say COVID raised the collective consciousness of a lot of our coworkers, as well as the lynching of George Floyd. It got a lot of people more engaged with social justice issues. So those two were large mitigating factors into the sort of consciousness of our coworkers. But I would say that in the news, the Starbucks workers in Buffalo going public was probably the most easy to bring up and talk about things on the shop floor. And that really got a lot of people interested in what a union was.
That makes a lot of sense. So among those workers, how many would you say were sort of conscious about these labor struggles? Would you say that it was a majority? Did you have to do a lot of outreach to sort of get people on the same page? What was that like?
Yeah, I would say that I wouldn't say a majority necessarily were well versed in like class struggle and specifically like the importance of what a union was or could bring. But I think that most people, especially being service workers, understood like the day-to-day struggle and the fact that rent was expensive in Boston and they weren't getting paid very much relative to how expensive rent and food is. So I think that most people, most workers possess an inherent class consciousness, but as far as a deeper understanding of labor organizing and the labor movement, I wouldn't say it was a majority. I certainly wasn't super well versed in how labor unions worked. I just knew that unions as a concept were important. So most of my education kind of became hands-on through the process of organizing.
That makes a lot of sense. You talked a lot about SEIU and Workers United. Uh, how did the union you reached out to help and mentor you in the unionization process, both abstractly but also practically? What did that look like?
Right. So I would say that because we didn't have any reps near us, a lot of the substantive work, as far as like getting our workers together and strategizing, a lot of that came from myself and Kyla just collaborating and working together. Fortunately, we both had a law background. Kyla was also a law student at the time. So we both had like a semblance and understanding of the law. I would say a lot of the mentorship and support came from the materials that the Buffalo workers provided, some of the resources, like we needed a Zoom account, we needed a Canva account so we could make graphics and stuff like that. That material support came from some of the Buffalo organizers with Workers United. That was helpful. And then basic trainings and inoculation, also materials from Workers United. So all of that was really helpful because we had maybe an understanding of how to talk to our coworkers and what to talk to them about, but the procedural things or like the itemized sort of list of facts about what that process looked like was not something that Kyla nor I had really much background in. So I would say they were really helpful in that respect. And then if we had any sort of like questions regarding the best ways to go about explaining it, they were also very available and helpful as well.
That makes a lot of sense. That knowledge is so valuable to be passed on from, people who are more well versed in it. I've experienced the same thing with graduate workers as well. The parent union has been very helpful. So I also wanted to ask you, in these initial conversations, you reached out to people, you converse among your workers, and obviously people have different sets of priorities. Some of them that are probably shared, like a want for better wage, wants for better insurances, health insurances. What did those setting up those priorities among your workers look like? Did you do more outreach or did you do more sort of surveying of what people's wants were?
Yeah, I think this is also a skill that I think is, at least in my case, because we didn't really have too many people helping us out with that. It was something that was learned along the way. But for new organizers, I think it's really important to remember that even though we live in a very digital age, one-on-one conversations and personal conversations, relationships are the most important part of organizing. So as much as we did do surveys and Google Forms and questions like that, the most substantive information about what people wanted and cared about came from direct conversations. So as much as surveys are helpful as a tool, they can't be the primary thing that we rely on. So those direct conversations were I would say the most informative.
I totally agree. One-to-one conversations builds a real connection, and I feel like you will see that person again. They will come to, an action, a rally. They will feel more engaged if they know someone personally who's in the union. I also wanted to know, what were those priorities early on? Like, what did people look at? You said you talked this is after George Floyd. This is when people's, activism was at the forefront of their mind. But, where did people's priorities seem to lie while you were starting the union?
Yeah, I would say some of the biggest priorities were this is right around the time that the company took away our sick pay for COVID. And, this is initially they had a policy of you tested positive, you would get like, I think 5 days coverage for COVID pay. They also had a sort of food security benefit where you could mark out like a sandwich and a drink every day, even if you didn't work. And they sort of unilaterally changed that. And so I think that as those protections withered away, especially during COVID and especially after the, the incubation period for COVID changed from like 14 days to 7 days to 5 days, all because the Delta CEO put in that request to the CDC to do that. When they saw the arbitrary nature of how these policies were enacted and how they could be taken away, I think a lot of workers wanted to make sure that those safeguards were protected. So a lot of them, like the food benefit especially and the sick policy, were big ones for them. And a lot of it's case by case too. Some folks, we have a very queer and trans workforce, so a lot of folks wanted better protections and guarantees for gender affirming healthcare. And also a lot of us rely on Starbucks for healthcare. So having reduced premiums and copays because they're pretty expensive, even though you hear that Starbucks has really good healthcare. It is still expensive to pay for. When you go to a doctor's appointment, you have to pay 30 to 50 bucks every time. So kind of policies like that really hit people hard directly on their day to day were kind of the initial ones that I was really hearing about as well as some workplace safety guidelines as well, particularly when handling, workplace incidents where folks feel unsafe. They wanted to feel like they had the ability to get people to leave the store. Historically, people have been threatened or harassed, either physically or verbally or sexually. And those customers aren't always dealt with swiftly or removed. So oftentimes people who have caused harm continue to return to the store. So a lot of workers wanted to make sure that there were protections and safeguards in those areas as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of retail and service workers can probably relate to a lot of those stories and angles. And I'm glad that Starbucks is sort of at the forefront of this unionization effort, or rather the workers of Starbucks. Which leads me to my next question. Like, you had to take an NLRB vote. How did that go? Was that at all contentious? Was there any pushback from the employer? Was it a smooth sort of process? Did you encounter any obstacles?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that in my experience, the main thing, especially so early on, our stores in Massachusetts, we were the fifth and sixth to file nationally. So there was still a lot of precedent that Starbucks was trying to set for the future of the campaign. So at that time, they were really trying to push regional bargaining versus store by store and regional elections rather than store by store elections, which is usually something that employers will often try to sort out at a pre-election hearing. So our philosophy is the Starbucks campaign was unique, I think, in that we wanted to bargain store by store, and so we argued for store by store elections, and the sort of overarching simplified legal argument there was that each store was unique in and of itself as a workplace culture to warrant a store by store bargaining unit, which we've won, up to now, I think pretty much unanimously. However, where it got unique and it still stands as a contentious issue, specifically in Massachusetts, is over the inclusion of shift managers in the bargaining unit. So, under the National Labor Relations Act, supervisory employees and managers are not classified as employees under the law, as in they're not included in a bargaining unit or a union. So here in Massachusetts, we have a specific classification for shift managers, which is unique to the other 49 states, which have shift supervisors. This goes back to a court case like 15 years ago. Point being, that classification made it more contentious since shift managers in Massachusetts had tasks that were more akin to managerial tasks than other shift supervisors. So we had to really fight hard to get the shift managers in our bargaining unit. Early on, a majority of stores that had shift managers did have them included. It wasn't until later on that we started to lose those arguments, unfortunately. So the first, like, I think 6 to 8 stores do in fact have shift managers here as a part of the bargaining unit. The ones after that have lost those arguments, but it's still a case by case issue. And I think Starbucks is trying to retroactively try to win those arguments at other stores, but we'll see where that goes. But other than that, the only other thing is that when we got to the NLRB election, they would put holds on the shifts who were able to vote. But other than that, like mine and Kyla's store, we became the first 2 stores in Massachusetts to unionize, and we both had unanimous elections. So most of the elections went really smoothly early on, but then as Starbucks tried to ramp up their listening sessions and their captive audience meetings, some of the tactics they employed made it a little more treacherous. But I'm curious, similarly, like, what was your process like? How does the grad student worker bargaining unit kind of play out, and what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so for graduate workers, as far as UMass Lowell goes, we've been unionized since 1996. So I was 2 years old at the time and currently not active in the union. But typically, there's this struggle that happens where the university wants to regard us as students more than workers when it's convenient for them. And of course, they'll use the same tactics as every employer does when they don't want unionization. They'll say it will only get in the way. They'll make arguments saying that it will not be to the benefit of graduate students, but rather it will limit the number of grad students that have opportunities to come to this university if you decide, to hold the university accountable for health insurance, for livable wages, stuff like that. So for us right now as an established union, we typically try to correspond with other unions and say, hey, how can we support you? We see that you're trying to unionize. Let us come to your actions on behalf of our university and say, look, people from other universities, maybe even other states, are interested and are coming out in support of your efforts. So that's what is valuable to me, and I'm sure to you as well, after you've unionized your store and are now onto your Starbucks rather, and are now onto bigger and better things. Which leads me to ask you, where are you now? So you worked on this one specific store, you reached unionization, and now you've reached further. By the way, your legal experience is great to hear. We've had to, have intimate conversations with lawyers just to get our heads on straight, but to have you here with your legal experience is very amazing. So what are you up to now? Where are you going to now?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for asking. Thank you for saying that. I always have to give the disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer, but I did graduate law school. It's just, formality, and also like in practice can't like make it seem like I'm giving legal advice, whatever. But I feel like going to law school entitles me to sound kind of like I know what I'm talking about, but not giving legal advice. Okay. So where am I now? Right. So I was on the Starbucks campaign for about a year and a half. And I still work at Starbucks. I'm still a barista. I'm still supportive of the campaign. No longer involved directly with them, but I have sort of taken my experiences of working on this campaign and my experiences with working with larger established unions, and have sort of developed a philosophy of the importance of democratizing and empowering rank and file workers to help organize themselves, right? So for the past 8 or 9 months, I've been supporting an independent union drive for workers out here who are also workers in the food service industry, not Starbucks though. And they're a part of a sort of smaller chain that have locations in different states throughout the country. So they're not yet public, so I can't reveal more about, who exactly they are or what they're doing, but I'm assuming by the time this airs, the campaign will be public. We're pretty close, but we're just coordinating with some other areas to make sure that, we can launch in tandem with one another. So I've been doing that for about 8 to 9 months. And on top of that, as you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, I have been working on building what's called the Independent Organizing Network, or ION. which is a pro bono legal initiative that seeks to provide free legal services for workers throughout their campaign. And the main sort of piece of that is educational resources. So having a broad network of lawyers and legal workers who can provide trainings and basically teaching workers how to navigate all the different areas of the law so that they know their rights, they know how to go about filing actions through the NLRB or the EEOC, et cetera, and also having like legal support if we need someone to litigate. But that's basically the philosophy. And fortunately, we have gotten approval from the Massachusetts chapter of the National Lawyers Guild to run that out here. We've been building the same thing in the Bay Area of California as well at the National Lawyers Guild there. And we're working on establishing those initiatives in different states and regions as well. So it's off to a really good start, and we're going to hit the ground running with it. And yeah, those two things have been kind of working in tandem to support this independent organizing drive. And the goal is to support workers throughout the country who work at this chain, but also to turn that into a broader support mechanism for independent organizing.
I love that organizational structure. And
Thank you.
yeah, that sounds amazing, especially for workers who, have a high turnover rate as maybe, retail and service workers do. Which is actually my next question. I was curious, how do you deal with that, with the high turnover rate? We have the same problem as graduate workers, not necessarily a problem, just the layout, where every 5 years it's sort of a new set of workers. How do you deal with that? Do you have materials that you consistently, put out? Do you have a sort of regiment? Do you try to give that knowledge on to the next sort of generation of people? What does it look like for Starbucks?
Yeah, 100%. So I think that it's a unique question in the context of Starbucks organizing because, we're still in the throes of our first campaign, whereas like, UMassL, you should had a union since 96. So in this context, it's unique in that we're still kind of figuring out how that really looks. But what I can tell you, at least from the short to midterm of like, 2 years of organizing on this campaign, is that there are a few different ways to approach it. I would say in the sort of day-to-day involvement in avoiding burnout, it helps to first and foremost know what your coworkers and peers' capacity is and not to overextend that, not to burn them out. It helps us to know what people are interested in, what their skills and talents are, their interests, and to check in with them and, be constantly showing that you care that they're involved. And that you have opportunities for them to be involved. The big thing that I want people to understand is that there's a role for everybody in a union campaign or in any sort of community organizing effort. A union can and should be completely comprised of the workers and their interests. So it's really a unique thing to every single union. It can look like whatever it needs to look like. If you have artists, make art for the union. If you're a baker, cook for the functions. And, it looks like what we bring to it. So that's really a key component of making people want to stay, is building that community. Building community is step one. A lot of people don't have a relationship with community, just living in the world that we live in. We're often very isolated. So to be able to build that community and show why it's important, why a union's important, and why just camaraderie is important, I think is a huge part of just de facto retention. But on top of that, knowing what interests people and keeping them engaged and showing that you genuinely care is huge. And another thing is being realistic about what people's timelines are, right? I know that a lot of my peers are college students, or a lot of my peers are trying to enter a different field that doesn't involve coffee. And it's okay to be realistic and honest about that and say, okay, well, how long do you think you're going to be sticking around? Do you think there's room for organizing and for working at Starbucks part-time while you're doing X, Y, and Z? Okay, if not, well, what do we want that to look like? So I think being realistic, understanding people's interests, capacity, and their time frame are all really, really important elements. And finally, I would say on top of all of that, really being able to keep good records and, like you said, like having regular updates or like, good communication so people know what's coming up next, what's happening, but also having a well-organized Google Drive or sort of shared drive to where you can keep all of this stuff and continue building off of it, so that when people come in and replace other people, they're able to sort of hit the ground running. I think delegation of roles and responsibilities is really important, with the understanding that if you're transitioning out of a role, you will help find your replacement prior to your departure so that we can keep the baton, passed quickly and evenly rather than it like dropping and we have to start from scratch.
Yeah, completely. And I love what you said about, you know, getting people involved who have different interests and making sure that they can sort of express those interests through the union. I think that's a huge thing. It's so important that the union is comprised of its members and is sort of democratically driven. We try to do that 100% and have all of our, decisions made democratically, so everyone feels that they can have an effect. From the small, which is just a vote, to bigger, like signing a petition, to bigger part, maybe being a part of an action, making signs, wherever they want to land and whatever they want to do, that there's a place for them there and that they feel like they're involved in the community. I love that aspect.
Well, I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious though, from your perspective, because how large is your grad union, right? I'm dealing with like 20 to 30 coffee workers at a coffee shop. You have a large constituency.
Yeah, we have about 500 members. However, I completely resonate with what you said about, people can sometimes be overtired by union work and you don't want to burn them out. The thing with graduate workers is that they're completely burned out 90% of the time. And so any amount of time we can get from them or interest we can, find in them, we really want to give them what they want to get out of a union. So for us, yeah, we have a much bigger union. So it's a different sort of beast, but at the same time, people are very exhausted and have a million things that are pulling at them at the same time.
See, that's what I'm curious about then in your particular, because for example, sure, we often do have grad workers who work at Starbucks part-time, et cetera, but that's different than if you are relying on, student teaching to make ends meet, et cetera, as a grad worker, and you are constantly burned out by being in school and all of this. It's not the case that every single Starbucks worker is in the same predicament that a grad worker is in, right? So if that is your entire constituency, how do you simultaneously make space and support people who are burned out and exhausted? And how do you encourage them to participate? Is that innate for them, or how do you really make them want to participate when they're so exhausted?
No, that's a great question. Like you said, we try to feed off of people's interests. I think people are exhausted, but they still have something that they can do. So for example, signing a petition is so minimal. If you get an email saying, hey, doing this will really help other grad students, and you can really make a difference. Signing a petition can be like entry step into union work. As well, people come from different backgrounds. If you were politically actively minded during the George Floyd stuff, during the past political turmoil, then maybe you have more of a heart for activism. Maybe you're a little more militant. Maybe let's say you have a legal background like you do, so you can say, oh guys, we should have this perspective. That's what we try to do is, okay, the people who want to be militant, let's give them the avenue to do that. The people who want to just do a little bit and maybe sign a petition and give us a thumbs up and like our social media, let's give them that. So we want to give people anything that they feel comfortable doing. That's what it looks like.
That's cool. I feel like this question has a lot of offshoots. So the last thing, I don't want to keep going on and on about this particular question. I know there are more, but I'm curious what your effective communication methods are, because, we've tried Discord, we've tried Signal, we've done text, email. And I think, at least personally, what I have found, just talking about the one-on-one conversations, even though, when we get into the tens and hundreds of people, if I'm organizing regionally, if you're just trying to reach your constituency, that's a lot of one-on-one conversations, right? It's no less important, but managing that is difficult. And the inverse of that, relying on Discord, Signal, social media, et cetera, more detached methods of communication, could often render a less than, sizable turnout or yield. People may mute the chats or just not check them or not think it's important. So have you found any particularly effective communication strategies that have been helpful to engage a majority of your base or a large heft of your base?
That's a great question. I actually wanted to ask you about social media as well, but yeah, no,
Yeah,
for us, it's like when COVID hit, social media was the bread and butter. It
yeah,
needed to be the case because nobody was on campus. Typically, what we would do is called walkthroughs. We just walk through campus, go through different labs, see who's available to talk to us. Obviously, if you have a flask in your hand, maybe you're busy, but if you're
yeah,
not, we can, have a one-on-one conversation and reach out to you. But since COVID, we've hit every avenue possible. I mean, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I'm probably forgetting a few, and especially Discord. That's where we keep, our main conversation. Other than that, like any university, we have an email system. We use Outlook, other universities use Gmail. And we basically have everyone's emails and we can just send out reminders every now and then. To say what's effective isn't exactly clear because some people have said, no, this doesn't work for me. I don't want to get bombarded with these emails. I don't have an Instagram. I don't do this. So the most effective thing is to talk one-on-one to people. I'm sure you know this, and any union organizer knows this. And I will say one other thing for students in particular: having food at an event is the number
yeah.
one best way to get people to participate.
Since you had an established union since 96 and you're organized with UAW, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So because of that, did you already have a good food budget for, worker events and stuff like that to get folks to come out? Because that was also something that we didn't necessarily have starting out. And that's where community support and organizing helped a lot. But without that, I think it does become difficult, especially if you're organizing a workplace that doesn't already have a union or some sort of budget that can be devoted to food or other things to get folks to come out. So yeah, what was like your mechanism for food and providing those other resources?
So that's one of the reasons I asked you as well about your relationship with a parent union or something like this, because for
Yeah,
us, our parent union has been very good to us. They haven't, reached into our organizing and tried to change anything. They just provide help. For example, legal assistance because we don't have that kind of expertise, and money for, be it food events if you want to have a big pizza party where we tell people what's going on in our bargaining with the employer, or if we want to make t-shirts that we give to members to say, hey, wear this on Wednesdays, wear red for Ed on Wednesdays, and that's how we show solidarity. They've been generous with that. So maybe half a dozen times every year we host a catered thing, and the parent union has been good to us and said, okay, order 10, 12 pizzas and we'll cover it for you. So that's kind of what I was curious about your union, your relationship with the parent union, if you have any. Because for us,
yeah,
we take out, you can decide to be a dues paying member or not. And either way, the union covers you either way. If you're a dues paying member, 1.7% of your or salary goes to the parent union. And if not, that's okay. You just don't get free T-shirts or something like that, and you can't vote
right,
in bargaining. Yeah.
right. I think that to bring it to what our experience was with the parent union with Workers United in this context, um, I think that the only reason it wasn't more systematized is because they didn't have a formal presence in Massachusetts, right? There wasn't like a local that was Workers United in Massachusetts. So
Mm.
they definitely like they sent us shirts, they sent us buttons, they provided not only like legal resources but also like union cards and like certain printing materials. And then there were other times where it was less consistent, so we had to like kind of figure out stopgap things. We fortunately had a lot of great community support again to provide printing or to provide transportation, to provide food. And to their credit, too, Workers United did like when we were on strike a few times, they did like cover the bill for like big like worker actions and stuff like that. So it's not like they were leaving us high and dry. I think that systematically, especially because the campaign was so new and there really wasn't an infrastructure or like a clear map of like how everything was going to be played out, the consistency of how we went about those costs was kind of varied and unclear. So I would say that if they had like a local nearby, it probably would have been a lot easier. given the parameters weren't also very established because it was so new. But it's not like they definitely did support us in a number of ways. But there were also times where we had to figure out those stopgap mechanisms, specifically when it came to printing costs and stuff like that, which I know other regions also had difficulties with sometimes. So that was our experience. But I think that also comes with being such a new campaign. Whereas like if we had a more established union with roots in the ground here, we probably would have been able to do that more regularly, but it taught us to be resourceful and it taught us to really build a solid community, which, I think to this day pays dividends in terms of the support that we get.
What is your relationship like with the public? There's, a lot of media work right now regarding unions. There's a lot of care about union work. Has it been beneficial to you to work with the media, with the press? Or has that been an obstacle at all? Have they covered it, not in a nice way, anything like that? And as well, your relationship with the community, not necessarily your workers. How have those two banks of people sort of helped or hindered your progress?
Right. So I'll speak to the media thing first because I view media and public as like kind of two separate things. So with respect to the media, and this was also a huge part of my learning experience as an organizer who'd never really done that or been in the spotlight before. I think that it's easy to, one, assume that everyone who's interviewing you has your best intentions at heart and is pro labor and wants to do the story just because of the intrinsic good of promoting labor. A lot of journalists and media, companies really are just going for whatever's going to be popular and get people's attention. Labor is super popular. Starbucks organizing was super popular at the time. So that's what people wanted to read. So it's important to remember that just because someone's reaching out because they want an interview doesn't mean that they have the same exact goals or vision that you do. And that's okay. But if you're just kind of like freewheeling, shooting at the hip, you may get a less than savory response, which is why it's so important to do media literacy training with your coworkers and colleagues. So and to be very clear on branding and messaging so that nothing takes you off course of what you want to say. Use media as a tool to get your words and demands out there. Don't ever let it be like an open questionnaire of like, what are you feeling about this? Like, it's not about your opinion. It's what the union should be saying about these issues. So that's something that I wish I would have known a little earlier that I learned throughout that process.
That's great to hear. And on that, like, what kind of things would you want to say to somebody that would be interested in unionizing now that maybe hasn't or is in the process of? What have you learned from sort of starting it from the ground up?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, I think I can tie that answer into what I forgot. I forgot to circle back on, which is first and foremost, community support is imperative and integral to organizing. And that community, both internally with your union, right? Step zero is I've started saying this on repeat. Step zero of organizing is building community. If you think you need to have the most beautiful hierarchy or lack of hierarchy or horizontal leadership model, none of that really matters if you don't have people showing up and buying into just the concept of what the union is, which is community. And that was something that Kevin Van Meter, who is now a professor at the University of Southern Maine, who's a longtime organizer, journalist for Labor Notes, et cetera. He's got a really long resume, but he's a really great dude. And he sort of gave me that piece of advice that, we were getting so transfixed on what democracy looks like and what all these like structures should look like. And, we kind of lost sight of the importance of having just hangouts. Most people are not going to just jump right into union stuff. Most people are busy or burned out, et cetera. So building that community first and foremost is the most important thing. All the other stuff will come, and it's not truly democratic if you have 3 or 4 people helping out to build everything because no one else is coming around. So community is the number one thing to focus on. And the other thing too that I would say is like a piece of advice is no one should ever feel like, act like, or be an expert on anything. And that is why you should always rely on asking, talking to your coworkers and your community, and really getting entrenched in your external community, the people around you outside of where you work, to rely on their knowledge and insights, because there are so many people with so many perspectives and experiences. And that's really all organizing is just collectively sharing your experiences and bonding with each other through the struggle, right? And so that is what I think is really important too, because it's easy to one, get caught up in the glamour of being interviewed and people want to talk to you. It's easy to get caught up in the fact that you're a leader and you're organizing this really big, important movement. Like there's so many things that you can get caught up in. The individual pieces and parts of you can come out, and that can detract from the broader importance of organizing. So if ever you feel that part of yourself, know that it's okay, it's natural, but always rely on building community first and foremost. I think that's the most important thing that I could ever share with anybody on that.
I agree 100%. So much of the work that we do that's not during bargaining with our employer is just making people feel like they're a part of a community. I mean, for any workplace, but especially for grad students, people come from all over the world, and it's a very isolating sort of experience to go through graduate school. And so to give them a space to be together, to socialize, to highlight their, let's say, their research or their lives, and to just build relationships, I feel like brings people closer together to feel comfortable enough to jump into something like labor or, what are their work conditions? What do you want out of being a worker? So I completely resonate with that 100%.
Well, I'm curious, Razvan. I'm curious. Well, I have two parts of it, but the first one is, what does building community, you kind of touched on it, but what does building community look like from a grad worker perspective? Like, what do people want, and how do you provide that in terms of just like building camaraderie?
First and foremost, it's feeling like you have a connection. I think there is almost an epidemic of students who are very isolated and feel that everyone's putting their head down and just trying to survive for 5 years. So
Yeah.
doing away with that sort of culture is really important, and to say, hey, come, let's just hang out. Let's just come to this pizza party. We'll just talk. Come out with us to this bar. We'll just talk. And to foster that systemically, and to say hi to people, stop by people's labs, make it a common thing, because that culture sort of grows and spreads. For example, one just quirky little thing I've tried to do is, I don't know if you've ever seen the photo series. It's like Humans of New York, where they just stop somebody, take a picture of them, write a little bit about them. I started a similar thing at UMassL, where we just highlight one grad student. I say, hey, we want to just highlight you. I just want to have a little interview with you. Who are you? Where are you from? What part of the world? What do you miss about your home country? What's your research like? And we just make these small little posts, and we sort of celebrate their life. And I think that their own departments are excited to see that. People who are like, oh, John is in that. Maddie's doing that thing. And to learn about departments outside of your own, because usually we don't. Everyone's just kind of isolated. So that's some of the ways we try to do that, and there's so much more we can do.
I think that's spectacular, and I think it's something that we could definitely do. I think that concept, it seems like, oh, we need this opportunity to celebrate somebody, but no, like, people deserve to be celebrated every day. Everyone has a story, and everyone has something unique and special about them, and as much as we probably don't want to admit it, we like having our stories told and feeling like we matter and that people want to hear about us. And I think that's amazing. And I genuinely want to make that a part of the organizing work that I'm doing. So I wrote it down here. So thank you for sharing that sentiment. And yeah, no, I think that's lovely. Thank you for elaborating on that.
Tyler, thank you so much for being here with us. And I have one more question before you go. I was curious if you could just describe how has a Starbucks worker's life changed before and after unionizing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask, because over 200 workers have been fired by Starbucks. So those workers, I think, have probably been pretty frustrated, but that's not the fault of them unionizing. That's the fault of Starbucks being a nefarious union busting corporation. But what I would say that speaks to the sentiment of workers who are organizing and who've fought to form a union as a whole, what I would say is that I think it changes your perspective on what a workplace is, what a job is. And I think that in many ways it's empowering. On one hand, you're teaching and showing people that you have rights at work, and it's not just that your boss can push you around, that you have power not only in your own individual self, but even more power when you merge with your coworkers and take action, and that there are paths to getting what you want and deserve. I think that that is such a uniquely special and powerful thing to learn, and not just learn because somebody could tell you it, but to experience it firsthand, to experience your power, to experience the ability to go on strike and shut your store down. um, it's something that you can only experience or understand once you've done it. And I think that sort of empowerment is it's what wakes people up, and it's what gets them more involved and wanting to be a part of more struggles, and showing people that no, your voice and your collective strength matters and has the ability to change things. And I think that that in and of itself makes it so much more worthwhile. And quite frankly, I think that my store has been stronger as a community because of organizing. I think that we just hang out now because that's just what we do and what we've learned through the process. And I don't know, it's given me some of my best friends, some of my best memories, some of my highest, happiest moments. So it's just a special experience. It's empowering, it's enlightening, and it's like it's life affirming. I mean, I'm sure. Has it been a similar experience for you? I'm curious, especially studying nuclear and quantum physics. Like, is this give you that like sort of inertia or spark that makes you excited?
I think what you were saying is exactly what I feel. The sense of personal empowerment, like you can make your workplace better for you and for the people around you, is so valuable. I cannot recommend it enough, and it does improve the culture of things. It does improve people's morale. It improved my morale as an organizer because I feel like I can actually make a difference and I can make people's lives actually better through union work. And we're fortunate to live in a time and a country where, that's possible. And I think everyone should sort of take advantage of it. Whatever your work is, it could be menial, it could be boring, you might not even be in the job you want to be in, but to make your own life better and other people's lives better is really a special thing. So I completely agree with what you were saying. Yeah, so thank you for sharing with me that great sentiment because I completely resonate with it. And I also
That's
want
awesome.
I want to thank you for being here. Do you have any other words that you would want to share with a community member that's watching this, learning about how to start a union for the first time?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, before you just like organizing, before you try to venture out or take it upon yourself to organize, talk with your coworkers, build what's called an organizing committee of your peers who feel similarly about the importance of organizing. And honestly, take your time to do your own research to figure out what that process might entail, what different unions have to offer, what you all are looking for, and what unions may align with those values. It's important to know what you care about as a collective of workers before you even really connect with a union, because that will dictate what your relationship looks like from the jump and what your expectations are. And I don't know where I'll be able to provide it, but if anybody ever wants to talk about organizing, or steps to organizing, or who to affiliate with, how to go about affiliation, what is independent unionism, if anybody ever wants to talk about that, I'm happy to put my email out there or something. But regardless, do your research and don't feel like you're pressed for time, and don't feel like you're alone. Make sure you talk to your colleagues and have a good base about you before you embark on that journey. And if you ever have questions, you feel free to reach out to me or any other community organizers, union folks, etc., because there is a wealth of knowledge and support waiting for you.
Tyler, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time. And that's going to be all of our time for tonight. So thanks, everyone. And we'll see you at the next show. Tyler Daguerre, thanks again.
It's an honor. Thank you.